Welcome to the Wellness on Tap podcast with your host, Dr. Debs Eastwood.
So we're ready to roll.
Okay.
So today I am feeling very privileged and honoured to have a very dear friend of mine, Mike McCarthy, sitting opposite me here in this studio. If some of you are thinking, I recognise that face, I don't know where from, we will cover that because you're not going potty. You may well do. He's a well-known face in his particular field. But for the past 3 years or so, that has completely changed. And I'm going to be asking some fairly poignant questions. Feel free to slam some back at me if you need to. That's not a problem.
I will.
Good, okay, she says. But first of all, one of the things I really want to champion, what we're talking about here today, is the charity that you are one of the front people for, the Baton of Hope. So can we start with an opener on the Baton of Hope and what it's all about and what it achieves, and then your role in it?
Yeah, sure. In short, the Baton of Hope is a suicide prevention charity. It's aimed at smashing the stigma around the subject of suicide and suicide prevention, but also campaigning and pressing for practical change. It's not just about awareness. We want to see something pragmatic in parallel to the awareness that we're trying to raise. And it's called Baton of Hope because there is an actual baton that's been beautifully crafted and designed and made, and maybe that's something that we can talk about.
I mean, it is a thing of beauty, isn't it? I've had the privilege of holding it at the event that you did in Sheffield in May. Quite heavy, and the engravings, the carvings on it, the structures, whatever you want to call them, the design is very significant, isn't it?
It's heavy with symbolism.
Yeah.
The people who made it for us, Thomas Light, who are goldsmiths and silversmiths by royal warranty, we couldn't quite believe our luck when they approached us to say, we've heard about this idea you've got for a charity. We can actually make the symbol. You know, we didn't even know when we set up the charity that there was a possibility of having a real baton. But if you think Olympic torch, it's, kind of along those lines. Yeah. But as you said, Debbie, just full of symbolism. For example, if you think of it like, almost like a flower at the top, you've got an opening and with semicolons, which I didn't know until 3.5 years ago, represented a symbol of hope to people who tried to take their own lives and had survived long enough to recognise that there is hope beyond those darkest days. That it's like in a sentence, the semicolon means there's more to come. We're not finished yet. And I found that to be quite a beautiful symbol. But yeah, inside the baton, for example, inside the handle part where no one will ever see it, but there's an inscribing inside the darkness of the handle that says, and it's a Desmond Tutu quote, that says, hope is being able to see that there is light despite all of the darkness. So yeah, I could talk about it for ages, but it is a beautiful thing.
It is indeed. I mean, the bit that first struck me was as you go towards the top of the baton and there's the etchings and it's people reaching out, isn't it? Symbolically represented.
It's like a lattice work and it represents people holding each other aloft in a circular community, of everlasting support. So, again, there's an upward spiral of gold in the baton that signifies the hope that's to come. So, and we found, it may sound strange to people that, you've got a physical symbol. Why does a charity need a physical symbol? But, I remember not long after we lost our son Ross, that I was talking to another guy called Steve Phillip, and who lost his son Jordan to suicide. And we were talking about what we could provide in terms of hope. And the conversation just it rambled it here, there, and everywhere.
Like the best ones do.
Yeah, exactly. And we just sort of came up with this idea that in every sport, there's a trophy or there are medals, look at the Olympics, that represent and celebrate primarily physical prowess. Yeah. But there was nothing out there in the world, actually. We don't think there's another symbol like it. There's nothing to represent, mental well-being and the beauty of this planet inside our heads, all the darkness and all the light that's in there. There's nothing to sort of celebrate how we make that fit, as it were, like the rest of our bodies. So that's how the idea came about.
I mean, I think it's fabulous, and I feel privileged that I got to hold it, and I'm very grateful to you for doing that. And I'm sure, the charity would like some pictures of that within the podcast, and I'm very happy to oblige and support what's going on. So you mentioned in there 3.5 years ago was when this journey started. Are you able to say something about that time?
Yeah, I retired. I'd spent 40 years as a journalist in broadcast news, both for the BBC and Sky News. And I'd finally retired in the autumn of 2020 and was just kind of, looking forward to a happy pension, happy retirement. And it wasn't to be, a few months later in February of 2021, actually, we got a call, my wife and I, in the middle of the night, about 3:00 in the morning. And it was from our son's fiancée, Charlotte, who told us that Ross wasn't too great, that he'd attempted to take his life, and that she would call us as soon as she knew anything definite. Within a few minutes, she called to say that he died, and he was 31 and had a fiancée that he loved. They were due to get married. They had a beautiful son, Charlie, who was 3 years old at the time, who they adored. And I just remember, I suppose, looking back, that it was a kind of trauma, and we just silently packed our things almost instinctively, because Ross lived a couple of hours away. And in the middle of a February night, we drove to his home. And almost the next memory, I can't remember much about the journey itself. We were just silent for a few hours, I think. Don't know how I drove even, but I got there, and the first thing I saw was a pair of white shoes, like training shoes, on the lawn, and it just caught my eye straight away. I just thought, what is that? It just looked unusual. And Charlotte told me that Ross had been playing in the garden with Charlie a few days earlier, and he'd made a snowman. And Charlie was concerned that the snowman couldn't move because he didn't have any feet. So Ross went and got some of his shoes and put them. And the snowman had gone, the snowman had melted. And straight away, it just, I suppose, that's when the emotion started to come out, because it kind of spoke to me about the fragility of life. 1 minute something's there and, it's precious, and then it's gone. And I suppose, looking back, it kind of kicked off the grieving process, really.
Yeah, for sure. What a symbol. Thank you so much. I've heard about this a few times now, and it's just still such a profound tale. And Ross wanted you to try and do something about it, didn't he?
He did, yeah. He left a long letter. It was 12 pages, and he wrote to every one of us in the family individually and said his goodbyes. He wrote to his friends, and one of the things that sort of jumped out from the letter and really resonated with me, and I don't know, just struck a very powerful chord with me, was that Ross said, "Please fight for mental health. The support is just not there." And at the time, it was part of, a letter that was his last conversation, I suppose. It's the last time we were going to hear, in inverted commas, his voice. But yeah, that resonated with me. And when I kind of started to get back on my feet months later, I wanted to do research. I was hungry for knowledge. I think the journalist in me started to come out, and I just researched everything that I possibly could. And I discovered, to my horror, really, that suicide in the United Kingdom is the biggest killer of men under 50 and of women under 35. And that the suicide statistics in the UK had not changed, that they'd stagnated for over 15 years. And I looked back at the 40 years of my career, and I'd covered, just about every one of society's ills, poverty, deprivation, terrorism, wars, you name it. I'd covered it, but suicide had never crossed my radar. It just hadn't. And I felt guilty, because here was, one of the biggest societal catastrophes that we face, not just in this country, but in many places around the world. Where were the conversations? Where were the political debates? Where were the lessons in the classroom? Where were the lectures in the colleges and universities? I suppose from that moment, I determined that I was going to do something about it. And that seemed to me Ross's dying wish. Please fight for mental health. The support is just not there. And that kind of kicked off the way things have been ever since he went. So, yeah.
What an incredibly brave thing that is that you did. I mean, what do you think now in retrospect it was part of your healing journey?
I think definitely it has been healing. At the fundamental level, it was, as I say, my son's dying wish. And when your son, knowing that he'd just got probably minutes left, asks you to do something, you do it, And sometimes I look to the sky and think, thanks, Ross. But no, it was that. But yeah, it's been part of my healing, I suppose. And I'm just so determined, and part of me is very angry that we don't talk about this issue. And we need to have open, transparent conversations about it. A lot of people die because they don't want to seek help for whatever reason, that they're told it's unmanly, or they're told that it's a burden on somebody else if you tell them and draw them into, your despair. That's all of these weird societal expectations that we have on people. So, the more I looked into it, the more I realized that there were hundreds of thousands of mums, dads, brothers, sisters, grannies, whatever, out there who were also bereaved and suffering. And again, kind of expected to brush it under the carpet, It's not the kind of thing that you raise in polite society, But we're hoping to change that with the Baton of Hope, because, if we can't talk about something like this, we'll never save people.
Completely. I mean, I know you use and are quite big on the different terminology that should be used around it as well. There was a lot of stigma attached, and I think perhaps, certainly in some veins of society, there still is, around the act of suicide. but it used to actually be criminal, didn't it? It used to be committing suicide, which is a term now that is very outdated and no longer appropriately used.
No, and yet, actually, you look at many dramas and, a lot of the media still use the phrase committed suicide. And as you said, I can't believe that in my lifetime, people who tried to take their own lives and survived could be and were put in prison. What kind of a society were we? You talk about the Dark Ages, and that phrase, as you say, the criminal status was lifted in 1961, and here we are, more than 60 years later, still using that phrase, committed suicide. And I'm a journalist, language in all its forms. I've always loved writing, and I understand. I try not to be too judgmental, because I think until we lost Ross, I used the phrase committed suicide, and that's what we're brought up to say. But now I would politely ask people, please say took their own life or died by suicide, because Ross was many things, but he didn't commit a crime.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's funny you saying about dramas, because if ever I'm watching on television now, because of you, and somebody says committed suicide, no, you shouldn't say that. Let's get in touch with that television company. Tell them. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah. I mean, I first met you through a networking group about 3 years ago.
Yeah, round about
3 years ago. And you were there basically hoping to get the word out more. That was your mission. You were pretty much at the beginning of your journey, weren't you? Very much, yeah. And,
we struck a chord, didn't we? And there was something about you that, I don't know, it was, I just got the sort of sense that here was somebody who cared, and I was like a piece of driftwood at the time. I didn't know where I was going or what I was doing. I was talking to anybody and everybody who would listen, to be honest. And somebody recommended the networking group. And it was just to try and get the word out there. And that's really what we're trying to do with the Baton of Hope, is just, please let's not be afraid to speak its name. It is suicide. Let's talk about this, because, if you think about it, a child or a student going out into the world, the biggest threat to their life is not COVID, it's not cancer, it's not road accidents, it's not drugs, it's themselves. Yeah. It's themselves. They are the biggest risk to their lives, and as I say, for men right up until the age of 50. And, I'm particularly interested, it's obviously an equal tragedy for men and women, but I'm particularly interested in why 3/4 of people who take their lives are men. And there's a reason for that.
Yeah, it can't be ignored, can it?
Absolutely not, no. And, I think very often we say, men don't talk. I think they do, actually, if they're given the right circumstances, and it's finding the right environment for men to be able to open up about their emotions. Yeah. And I facilitate a peer-to-peer support group for men in Sheffield. And the first, it's for a charity called Talk Club, totally separate to Baton of Hope. But one of the first questions we ask each week is, how are you out of 10 and why? And it's a great question, very simple. Yeah. But first of all, it asks you to put a marker on your mood. Mm-hmm. And that's not something we do we? We don't sit back and think, where is my mood today? We just get on with the day, don't we, sometimes?
And sometimes it's harder than others.
Absolutely. And sometimes we don't even recognise why. No. But it asks you to sort of rate yourself and then to explain why you've put yourself at a certain, level. And again, that's something that we don't tend to do. We've all got such busy lives. Yeah. To be able to sort of sit down and say, how do I feel? So and why am I like this? What is it? What's bothering me? Why have I only given a score of 2 or 3 or whatever? Yeah. I do ramble a lot, I'm just,
It's good. It's good. It's making my life a lot easier because I was going to ask you about the talk club and you brought it up. So, that's great. But
do you know what it is, though?
Go on.
It's because I've been paid to speak for 40 years of my life. I don't know when to stop. That's the problem.
Oh, well, good. That's even better then. You're not getting paid for this, though. You do know that, don't you? Just get that one straight.
Understood.
But yeah, I mean, talk club's a very important thing to get people talking, no matter whether it's reality or not, that men do or don't talk more. I'm sure that they do talk, but differently. There's a lot of bravado that, you see in society, patting each other on the back. Oh, you'll be all right, mate. And these awful phrases, man up. How does that help anybody?
No, and it's like strong silent type is very often used as a phrase to describe the, ideal individual, in terms of masculinity. Strong. Who put those words together? Strong and silent. I think it says it all, that at its core, it means that vulnerability is weakness, and talking about your vulnerabilities is drawing attention to your weaknesses, in inverted commas, as a male. And I think that, again, we've been bombarded with this idea through the media and, societal expectations for so many years that and the world's moved on, the world's changed. And I don't think men in some ways have moved with the times. Okay. And, I think individual men, we all have to kind of take responsibility. And I don't know, I sometimes think that as men, we live a lie, Do we think that boxers don't cry? Do we think that rugby players don't cry? Of course they do. But I think perhaps, and it's a generalisation, but I think perhaps when men cry, they cry alone and they won't share it with people. And that speaks for, the whole of just chatting about your emotions. And it's the emotional side, I think, that we don't think of as part of masculinity. It doesn't fit in with the image of masculinity, strong, silent type and all the rest of it. So, I think there's sort of quite a long way to go in terms of men in particular opening up about, what it is that's bothering them at their heart and soul.
Yeah. And I think you just made me think about men in relationships, that what women crave is emotional openness from a man. So hopefully, maybe there's going to be a doorway opening that hasn't been opened in the past, where men were always seen to be the provider. They had to be the strong one in the family. They had to be the breadwinner, was the phrase, wasn't it? And that's all changing in society now, isn't it? So
it is, and all changing for the better.
Yeah.
And I think that it's largely thanks to the younger generation. Well, certainly younger than me, but then most people are younger than me. But it's the younger people who are pushing the door open in terms of that particular argument. But yeah, I think just emotional intelligence, I think, is something that seems to come more easily to women. And there's no expectation, there's no condemnation of women who do express emotional intelligence. With men, I think it is quite different. And as you say, that thing, bravado, dig deep and you'll be fine.
All those platitudes.
Yeah, and it's completely outdated. As I say, the world's moved on, times have changed, and things are beginning to change as well. But I think you were always the fixer. Men were always the fixers, not the nurturers. And I think even with Ross, if I look back now, I think that maybe I tried too hard to fix him instead of just listening to him.
Hindsight's a very exact science though, Mike, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But, there are times when I just think, I don't know, even now, I just think, let him speak. Don't try to be the dad, Yeah.
But you were his dad, and he loved you deeply.
Yeah, we loved Ross, and Ross loved us. And, you know, it's a weird thing because, you know, being bereaved by suicide, because we know that, you know, we were and we are a loving family. And we knew that we had a great relationship with Ross, and yet, I don't know, there's something within human nature that's the other voice on your shoulder, isn't it, that says, maybe you should have done this, maybe you should have done that, or what if you'd done this, what if you'd done that? And try as I might, it's very difficult for those questions not to emerge. We don't beat ourselves up about it, but there are times when we question. You know, you look back at the rows that you had, you know, so many things, and think, was I right? Could I have handled that better? And again, you know, for hundreds of thousands of people, like, you know, our family, it's the same thing, that those nagging questions seem to be part and parcel of it, no matter how much talking you do, no matter how much you think you've healed. There are so many kind of triggers out there, really.
Oh, yeah. Society's full of little reminders, isn't it?
It is, things that, you know, people possibly wouldn't even imagine. I mean, we were talking earlier to one of your good friends, and she mentioned Paphos in Cyprus. And immediately it's the thought, that's where Ross was planning to get married, you know. And it's difficult sometimes. I don't know whether anybody else does this, but when you've got such a profound sense of bereavement, it's sometimes quite difficult to concentrate. And I have to apologise to people in advance and say, look, if I drift off down some rabbit hole, I'm not being rude. It's just that it's constantly on your mind, and it's, you know, it's difficult sometimes to focus completely.
Yeah, especially if you get a very pertinent trigger.
Yeah, because I suppose, you know, if you're in conversation with somebody, you've kind of got to close that trigger down. And it's even things like colour. I'm noticing on the wall behind you, there's a mustardy colour. And Ross had an unusually mustard coat, a winter jacket thing. And again, just the colour, the mustard colour, makes me think of him. So many things, you know. And that in a way you can't fight it, you know, but I do have to like give myself a sharp reminder sometimes, you know, come on, concentrate.
Yeah. So I want to move slightly, still within the same arena, still very pertinent, but earlier on this year, an event that you had been planning, no doubt for an awful long time, came to be in a really good sized venue. And I know you were wondering, how's this going to work? Because a conference about suicide prevention, people might see that and think, oh my goodness gracious me, this isn't going to be any fun. My God, it was such an enlightening, incredible day. Lots of poignancies, of course, naturally. And the most poignant thing for me was in the space that you had set aside for the stalls for various different groups of people that offer help. And one of them was a group of people that you make a little square for a quilt that gets put together. And I was looking amongst those and I saw one for Ross. And just slightly down and across from that, there was one for somebody who I went to medical school with.
Right, okay.
Who, up until that time point, we weren't close friends at medical school. We were in the same year group. We knew each other. We had occasional placements together. And it just brought me right back to those days. The second I saw that, that was really poignant for me. I took a photograph of it because it really struck me at how wonderful a tribute that is, and made me think about what the people that were actually crafting that square must have been feeling and going through at the time, and how symbolic it all was. Yeah.
That's really interesting to hear your reaction to that. And it is I find it an extremely moving piece. And if I'm not very much mistaken, I think it's still on display at the Millennium Gallery in Sheffield, along with the Baton, actually. But yeah, I mean, with Ross's, for example, his mum, my wife, Glenys, made the panel, and it's meant to be a kestrel flying in front of the moon, because Ross loved the film Kes. Again, that kind of resonated with him. And Ross used to lark about a bit like the lad in the film. And I think that story of I suppose ultimately it's a spirit that's killed. Just talking about it sort of, made me realise probably what he saw in it. I don't know, but anyway, it's a kestrel that represented Ross's sort of freedom and spirit. And at his funeral, one of the songs was "You Saw the Whole of the Moon." Oh, it's the Waterboys, I think.
Waterboys, yeah.
Yeah, and so. Again, every time we see a full moon, like there was one last night, very beautiful one last night. Again, we think of Ross. So each of those panels, encapsulates so much, and just all the care and all the love and all the compassion and all the sorrow and. It's all gone into that quilt, and it's a brilliant piece of work. And I would encourage anybody, if they can get to see it, it's well worth seeing.
Oh, definitely. I was really struck by it. And I was very, very glad that I took the time and the effort to stand there and just feel it, and just be in that space, be in that emotion.
I think as well that, that you mentioned about, your friend. I don't know if you knew about your friend's bereavement, but a lot of people have come across something, as a result of what Baton of Hope have done. And they hadn't realised, because we tend not to talk about it, they hadn't realised just how widespread it is. Yeah. And it's all around us. And if it were anything else, any other illness, because it's mental illness and because, the spending on mental illness is a fraction of what we spend on physical illness, the research, the attention that we give to it, all of it, a fraction of the way we respond to physical illness. And we don't, we tend not to recognise that. It's very much a kind of Cinderella thing. So we're hoping to change that. And just listening to your reaction there, I know, we had a guest speaker, Alistair Campbell, the former spin doctor, and I know he said that he was very moved by the quilt. And I think that's common for people who see it. They're very, very touched by it.
Yeah, I mean, we heard about her because that was the first time I went on Facebook when I was at medical school. Up until then, I'd not bothered with it, but that was the way they communicated, because I was quite old when I went to medical school. And so I was mixing with people that literally were at that time point half my age. And, Facebook was their thing then. I know it's moved on now, and it's TikTok and Instagram for the youngsters, isn't it? And us older generation stuck with Facebook, if anything at all. But then that was the way that, the three-legged pub crawls and all that kind of sort of, information, as well as tutorials and things like that, of course, was spoken about. And it was discussed on there. And she had been not all that long off becoming a consultant in her chosen speciality. So on the surface of things, she was one of life's successes, but clearly to her, those successes weren't the things that were uppermost in her mind. There was obviously things that weren't needs of hers that weren't being met, that were important and at her core, that caused her to take the path that she did.
Yeah, and again, it's not uncommon at all for someone to go and seek help and be put on a 6-month waiting list or even longer. I mean, Ross had suffered with severe depression for over 10 years. He went to ask for therapy and he was put on a 6-month waiting list. He died 2 weeks into the wait. And again, I genuinely don't feel anger. There's just too much love to feel angry. But I just think surely we should recognise that for what it is. He was, in effect, suffering a terminal illness, and yet he was told to go away for 6 months. Yeah. Okay, it's not as easy maybe to diagnose as some other terminal illnesses, but the fact remains, you cannot tell suicidal thoughts to park yourself for 6 months. Yeah. You cannot say to somebody with suicidal ideation, hold on for 6 months. Doesn't work like that. And if you don't catch them at the right moment, you don't catch them. Yeah. And again, we're determined, whether it be through Parliament, through politics, through education, through the media, all of these sectors of society, we're determined that, we've got to get to grips with this. It's almost like, I don't know, there's a toxic gas out there and people are falling to the ground, and we're holding our noses and stepping over them and kind of not really wanting to notice that they're there. But, it is, as I said earlier, and you can't say it often enough, the biggest killer of men under 50 and women under 35 in this country. And how shocking it is that, there are so few opportunities like this to encourage people to open up about it. And thank you, for the opportunity that kind of moment of connection when I first met you. It was online, it was a remote connection, but turned out to be very true. And thank you for caring. Thank you to everybody out there who cares. The world needs you, and we need more people like that who care enough to want to ultimately save lives, I guess.
Totally, yeah. And for me, it's part of the holistic practice that I believe, as a medic and now as a holistic health practitioner myself, that we should encompass. It shouldn't be something that's shoved under the carpet anymore. And that statement you've just made about mental health in these cases being a terminal illness, I've never heard it expressed like that before, and that is so true. That was like a mental slap around the face in a very nice way. That's a different way of looking at things, and I think it's something that needs to come out.
Yeah, and I don't know, I kind of want to scream to the world, and there are good people working in the mental health services, underpaid, overworked, under-resourced, but committed people working in, but they haven't got the resources that they need, and it's not that somebody's doing it out of any sense of malice or anything like that, but I just want to shout out to the world, it's suicide, guys. That means it's terminal. It's suicidal ideation. Yeah. That person is looking to take their own life. Yeah. Don't send them away. We can't send them away for 6 months and expect them somehow to sort it out themselves. Yeah. And actually the revolving door of going from GP to crisis team to wherever and then back to your GP, it's so heartbreaking. Some of these people struggle to get out of bed in the morning. Yeah. Ross never missed a day's work, or I think he rarely missed a day's work. He got a sort of strong work ethic. And yet he was, summarily discharged from the GP practice because he didn't make an appointment, And again, I think we've got to say to GPs, a lot of them hardworking, good people, but we've got to say to them, if you're suffering from severe depression, it is as much as you can do to get out of bed in the morning, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, I could go on. There were lots of other sort of circumstances surrounding Ross's death. You know, he was very much, should have been top of the list and red flagged, and yet was never officially diagnosed with, you know, anything really. Suspected bipolar, but that's as far as it got.
Wowzers. I mean, I found the conference that day was actually full of hope.
Yeah.
There was a lot of cheer and really good feeling. And there was a particular photo that I just managed to catch of you when you were summing up at the end, where the joy of it, of actually being able to express and to have all these people together that got the same mentality, the same hope. I'll cherish that picture because it was just wonderful to see that the culmination of it for you as your friend.
Oh, thank you. That's so kind. And I felt the same thing. I did feel, because, you know, I say to people, we're kind of in the hope business. It's not all about death and despair. Yeah, sure, it's a tough subject. It's a heavy subject. But actually, we're about saving lives. It's about hope. It's about the future. It's not about death and despair. And somebody said that the person who organised the event, I mean, I just went along and talked basically, but the person who organised
it. You did a bit more than that, Mike.
Just a tiny bit. But yeah, he said, how do you want people to feel at the end of the day? You know, what do you want them to sort of go out feeling like? And what do you want them to take away from it? And, you know, a favourite question of people who organise events, I guess. And I just said, you know, honestly, I just want people to, A, recognise that suicide prevention is everyone's business. You know, nobody is immune to it. It can affect anybody. But also to go away feeling like they've had a great big hug. And I certainly felt at the end of the day like I'd had a great big hug. And it's sort of like, it's really gratifying to hear you say that, you know, the hope, there was hope and there was cheer. And it's about, I don't know, believing that we all have a future, and no matter what we're going through, you know, whether you've been neglected, whether you've been ignored, whether you're in despair, you know, whether you've been rejected, that day will pass. And there are actually, you know, armies of people out there who want you to stay.
Yes.
You know, and sometimes when you are in despair, that's the last thing that you can sort of get into your mind. Yeah. But actually it's true. Yeah. And we're trying to help people to remember that.
I think there was one thing that really struck me. And funnily enough, you mentioned it just before we came and sat down here, it's that just don't be afraid to ask somebody. Mm-hmm. If somebody appears really down, or is not talking about the future anymore, they're very tearful. The old concept used to be, if you ask somebody like that about whether they're feeling suicidal, that's it, you've basically pushed them into it. What a load of rubbish.
Absolutely. And again, it's part of these persistent myths, the mythology surrounding suicide, this idea that by saying the word, you'll somehow plant the seed in their mind. You know, I remember once as a journalist going to a hazard assessment. What was it? It was basically, if you were going out to war, you had to sort of go through this course to learn about what to do if you came across somebody who'd been blown up, or, you know, in a vehicle that had gone over a landmine and all the rest of it. And it was all about the physical side of it. But you know, at times I just sort of think, you know, where is all the education surrounding the sort of mental side of it? And it is getting better. There is more of it coming along, and there's more of it that exists at the moment. But I've completely lost my thread on that.
I was just saying it's
told
okay
you.
to ask the question. You did. That rabbit hole was there, wasn't it?
It was,
Yes.
it was. No, you're absolutely right, yeah. Age doesn't help either, but yeah, it's just, you know, positively a good thing for people to say. Oh, that's where I was trying to get to with my little story about the course that I did. That, you know, what happens if you come across that person on the bridge? You know, but who tells you what to do in those circumstances? Nobody. But the thing to do is, you know, at the right time, after maybe you've developed a little bit of rapport with that person, if you can, is ask them, you know, what they're doing, what they're planning to do.
Yeah.
And then you started a conversation and opened the door to the possibility that they don't have to do that.
Absolutely. And there it is, yeah.
Yeah. So we were being told all this stuff about, you know, how to, you know, deal with this injury or that injury, all very useful stuff. But yeah, what do you do if you're that person who happens to be driving past that remote bridge or whatever, and there's somebody standing on the edge, you know, and if you think that mentioning suicide is the last thing that you should do, well, that shows how little, generally as a society, we understand about suicidal ideation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to ask you one final question. If there was a message, you can attach it to a magic wand if you want.
Oh.
And it be any message. What would you like the message to be that gets out there, that's perpetuated?
I think it's just one word, and it's listen. You know, because we've talked a lot about the importance of talking, but, you know, the other side of the coin is to listen. And actually listening sometimes is not that easy, to truly listen so that you hear people, you know, that you really hear them. And again, you know, I kind of recognize that myself, that if I had my time again, I would have just listened more, just, you know, even if it's, sorry, it's happened again. But I'll start the answer again. I would just say to people, listen. Because we've talked a lot about talking and you know, opening up and all the rest of it. But I think, you know, the other side of the coin is to truly listen to people. And sometimes that's not easy. But listen and hear what they're saying. And sometimes that could be the difference between life and death. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's, I don't know, I'm just so grateful. And I think I mentioned earlier that I'm just so glad that there are people in the world like you who care. And it genuinely fills my heart to know that people like you exist, because if we're going to make any changes, you know, you're the kind of person who's going to make the change. So thank you, you know, from my heart.
Mike.
Thank you.
Oh, always welcome. Thank you, my darling. I appreciate your time.